A 767 on final approach, a highway below it, a delivery truck. And is it a matter of the highway suddenly rising up to get in the way? No, it's a tricky short approach, and we'll look at how an airliner coming in from Europe got too low on the final approach. And we'll examine a mystery in the truck dash cam footage on this episode of Taking Off. Hi, I'm Dan Milliken, and we're going to examine that dashcam video from the truck frame by frame later in this video, so stick around. This accident could have been so bad. Newark International Airport is boxed into an incredibly packed area of real estate. I remember my first time driving up I-95 and into New Jersey and Newark and passing that highly industrialized area. I wondered how in the world New Jersey could be the Garden State. It's not a simple airport, and it does not have simple airspace around it. Before we get into the details, the truck driver, Warren Boardley, was taken to the hospital with cuts to his arm from broken glass. He was treated and released the same day, and I'm glad that he's okay and everyone's okay. All right, let's get into it. On Sunday afternoon, United Airlines Flight 169 struck a light pole on the New Jersey Turnpike and hit a bakery delivery truck while descending toward the runway at Newark. The airplane continued. It landed. It taxied to the gate. 221 passengers deplaned normally. And for 30 minutes, nobody at the airport knew. United Flight 169 had departed Venice Marco Polo Airport on the morning of May 3rd. About 8.5 hours later, on Sunday afternoon, somewhere between 1:50 and 2 p.m. local time, it was on final approach to Newark Liberty International Airport, descending towards runway 29. The aircraft was a Boeing 767ER extended range, built in 2002, registration November 77066. 221 passengers, 10 crew members, 231 total people on board. Okay, before we get to the sequence of events, I need to explain something about runway 29 at Newark. Newark Liberty has 3 runways. 2 of them, the parallel pair, are the ones most people are familiar with, 11,000 feet and just under 10,000 feet, standard runways for a major transatlantic hub. Runway 29 is different. It's shorter, seldom used, and it runs almost perpendicular to the New Jersey Turnpike, which is Interstate 95. Now, if this sounds familiar, it's because it does. The DCA mid-air collision had a similar situation. They had one long runway that was mainly used, and they had a shorter runway that was sometimes used to relieve congestion. And they had, instead of a highway running under the short approach, they had a helicopter route. But back to Newark and runway 29. When a plane lands on runway 29, it crosses directly over active lanes of I-95 as a normal, expected, published part of the approach. This is not unusual. It's not a mistake. It is by design. Runway 29 was built and certified by the FAA with the interstate directly in the flight path. Drivers notice, people stop and photograph it low and loud on a clear afternoon. That's just what runway 29 looks like. And what you're seeing is a previously recorded landing. Shows you how close it is. The runway is 6,725 feet long, which is acceptable for a 767. But here is something that matters. Runway 29 has a displaced threshold. The official beginning of the landing zone is not at the physical end of the pavement. It's set back 224 feet from the approach end of the runway. According to the FAA's current official airport data, the actual landing distance available on runway 29 is only 6,501 feet. The first 224 feet of pavement is there. Pilots can use part of it for a takeoff roll or a rollout in the opposite direction. But it is not part of the landing zone when arriving on runway 29. And I say pilots can use part of it because yellow chevrons on a displaced threshold are not usable for takeoff. Now, you're absolutely not to land on a displaced threshold. This gives you that 6,500 feet. For non-pilots, a displayed threshold is typically established for one of a few reasons: obstacle clearance on the approach path, pavement preservation, or noise abatement. In Newark's case, the FAA's official airport data lists a published obstacle in the runway 29 approach path, a 54-foot sign 818 feet from the runway and about 514 feet right of centerline. These obstructions are on the New Jersey Turnpike, which runs directly below that approach path. Under FAA Part 77, the federal regulation that governs obstacle clearances near airports, an interstate highway is treated in obstruction calculations with a 17-foot vehicle clearance added, and that accounts for trucks, high clearance cabs, loads. A loaded tractor trailer can reach 13 to 14 feet. Add the 17-foot FAA buffer, and you're looking at roughly 30 feet of effective obstacle height for a vehicle on the turnpike directly below the approach. And that's by the book. But this particular approach, and we'll get to it in a minute, lists the threshold crossing height to be 60 feet. The airplane has to be 60 feet above the threshold. And back that up 700 feet at a 3% glide slope, and it's even higher over the highway. Now, I've tried to find the height of the streetlights there, and studying video and pictures, I can't really tell. And I'm sure that's going to be a key focal point of the NTSB investigation. But the light height shortens right under the approach, and that's pretty standard for most airports. A displaced threshold and tight clearances on published obstacles do not mean runway 29 is unsafe. The FAA certified this approach. Commercial aircraft use it regularly. But they do mean this: the margin for error here is smaller than on a standard instrument runway. There is less room between a normal approach path and something going wrong. That is a design fact that the NTSB will examine. All right, now let's talk about the approach. There is no precision instrument landing system on runway 29, no ILS. The parallel runways have ILS, a radio-based system that gives pilots precise vertical and lateral guidance to the threshold in any weather. Runway 29 has none of that. The approaches available to the pilots that day were not precision. So for non-pilots, what's the difference between a precision approach and a non-precision approach? With a precision approach, think ILS, you have continuous vertical and lateral guidance all the way down to the runway. The instruments are essentially flying a tunnel in the sky and telling the crew exactly where they are in 3 dimensions the whole way down. Okay, a non-precision approach gives you lateral guidance left and right, but not that continuous vertical picture, with some exceptions to our navs. I don't want to get in the weeds here with like LPV and all that kind of stuff. There are RNAV approaches that can be just as precise as ILS, maybe even arguably better, but according to the FAA, they're referred to as non-precision. United 169 flew the RNAV to runway 29, and RNAV stands for Area Navigation. It's a GPS-based instrument approach. The crew gets lateral guidance from satellites and some ground-based stations, a digital track to follow on their instruments, and their instruments can follow along as well, like autopilots. The RNAV WSGI comes in more directly aligned than a couple of the other visual approaches, but it's still a non-precision approach. Now, the weather. On May 3rd, the winds were reported 290 out of the west, 23 knots, gusting 32. But buried in the METAR, that's the airport weather, is a warning. Peak wind 36 knots from 270, and this is at 1:24 p.m., 27 minutes before the accident. Gusty winds can really play with an airplane's descent rate. If you're coming into land and pick up a strong gust, your airplane will actually have better flying performance. In other words, it can cause you to land long. If you suddenly lose a bunch of wind, the opposite happens. Your plane might rapidly lose altitude, and that change of winds can be referred to as wind shear. And when the tower cleared United 169 to land, they gave a current report of winds 300 at 15, gusting 31.
United 169, heavy Newark Tower, hello, wind 30015, gust 31, runway 29, clear to land.
Clear to land, 29, United 169.
And what's significant here is the difference between a 15-knot wind and a 31-knot gust. With that level of coming and going, even a little wind shear that low to the ground can have some effect. Runway 29 is oriented roughly at 288 degrees, pretty much into that wind. Air traffic control vectored United 169 to runway 29 because of those wind conditions. That runway assignment was standard procedure. The perpendicular runways would have introduced a strong crosswind component. Conditions were visual, great visibility, no precipitation, ceilings well above the published minimums at 7,500 foot. So the airplane tracks the RNAV GPS approach inbound, aligned on 288 degrees towards runway 29 on their short approach. The PAPI, the visual glide path system that tells pilots whether they're high or low, was operational. On most runways, the PAPI sits on the left side. On runway 29 at Newark, it's on the right. That's non-standard. A PAPI is a row of 4 lights at the side of the runway. On the correct glide path, 2 show red, 2 show white. Too high, you see more white. Too low, more red. It's the primary visual guidance on a visual approach with no instrument system below it. AOPA published a chart analysis specifically about this runway, runway 29 at Newark, and they flagged the PAPI position directly. Their published guidance warns that a pilot flying as if the PAPI is in the standard left position when it's actually on the right can end up misaligned, maybe tracking towards the taxiway instead of the runway. And I'm not saying that happened here. I'm mentioning just another tricky part, non-standard part of this approach. And the other important thing to keep in mind, the PAPI for 29 comes with a warning. Unusable 4 degrees left of centerline. That means a pilot who is a little left of center, the PAPI is unusable for visual glide slope reference. And that doesn't mean the PAPI caused anything on Sunday. The NTSB will determine that. What it does mean is that this approach has multiple documented pre-existing complexities, tight obstacle clearances, an interstate directly below, a non-standard PAPI, no ILS, a tight turn to final on the approach. All those were in place before May 3rd, and investigators will look at that full picture. Approximately 700 feet from the runway threshold, directly over the southbound lanes of the turnpike, United 169's landing gear and the underside of the aircraft struck a highway light pole. The pole was knocked into a passing Jeep. The landing gear and underside also struck the trailer of a southbound truck operated by Baker's Express, a company that delivers for H&S Bakery out of Baltimore. The driver was Warren Boardley, making a delivery run to a Newark airport depot. Dashcam footage shows Boardley glancing out of his window as the engine noise grew. Seconds later, his windshield shattered as the landing gear struck the trailer. The aircraft was traveling over 160 miles per hour at that moment, ground speed, according to ADSB data from Flight Radar 24. The aircraft continued. It crossed the threshold. It landed runway 29, normal rollout, taxied to the gate, no emergency declared. United's statement says the crew appeared unaware of the full extent of the contact at the time of landing. And based on the ATC audio, that tracks. Approximately 30 minutes after landing, while 221 passengers were deplaning and other aircraft continued landing on the same runway, an airport operations vehicle spotted the plane at the gate and the damage.
Arlen, did you get a report for what the issue was?
I got different conflictions on the turnpike.
Yeah, they felt something over the threshold, and there's a hole in the side of the airplane. So I'm going to get you on the runway here in a moment. They said it was right at the threshold, so it'll just be a minute.
Right.
And that's when the airport found out. That's when the extent of the contact became known. Now let's examine the truck. Warren Boardley driving. You've got the camera in the cab and a dash cam looking out. Boardley is southbound, the airplane approaching from his driver's side, the left. When we go frame by frame of the moment of collision, you can see what looks like a tire out of his window, his left window. The 767 has gear that hangs with the leading tire down. But this one doesn't impact the truck, clearly. Was this left main landing gear? Why in the surveillance video was the left main's lower than the right, as if the 767 was in a slight bank to the left. What did hit the truck? Maybe the object we see in the dash cam footage isn't a tire. Investigators will be looking at this mystery. By the surveillance video, by all accounts, it appears the left main is what makes contact with the trailer. Now, Boardley was transported to the hospital with cuts to his arm. He was treated and released the same day, according to spokespeople from H&S Bakery. The NTSB investigators arrived Monday, May 4th, and have classified this event as an accident. They interviewed the flight crew on that first day, and they have ordered United Airlines to preserve and secure the cockpit voice recorder and the flight data recorder. The FAA has also launched an investigation. United has removed the flight crew from service pending investigation, which is standard. I'm glad the NTSB is in on this one. It's important to know what caused this. It could have been a huge tragedy. Had the collision damaged the plane enough to cause gear failure or even control surface failure, the crew would not have had hardly any time to deal with an emergency. I am so glad everyone's okay. Let's find out the cause and get it fixed. Now, what we don't know is why the aircraft was below the glide path, and that is the central question. Was it the wind gusting, the non-standard PAPI, the shorter runway, the pressure to put it down quickly? Something on the flight deck. The CVR and FDR will tell investigators things we just don't have access to today. And hopefully recordings from the flight deck weren't timed out. But as far as what happened and answering that question, I'm not going to guess. No one who wasn't in that cockpit can answer right now. The NTSB preliminary report is expected within 2 weeks to 30 days, and that will establish the basic facts from the recorders. Probable cause will take significantly longer. And here's what I think this incident puts on the table. Beyond the immediate facts of Sunday afternoon, Runway 29 is a certified legal approach. Planes have crossed the turnpike on that procedure for years. The displaced threshold, the tight clearances, the non-standard PAPI, the highway below. Those are all documented features of this runway. They were there yesterday. They'll be there tomorrow. What this incident surfaces is a design question. The complexity of this approach and landing for large, wide-body planes, does it lower the margins for safety? How much margin actually exists on a day when the approach isn't perfectly flown? Those aren't accusations. Those are questions a thorough investigation asks, especially after discovery of the incredibly tight margins of the DCA midair and helicopter Route 4. All right, that's our report. Thanks for watching, and thanks to our sponsors like Clemens Insurance. They recently saved me 38% on my airplane coverage, and that's nearly $3,000, real money. And they saved it because they went to bat for me, which is what brokers are supposed to do. And they cover all types of insurance. Go to clemensinsurance.net, tell them I sent you. And if you haven't seen our other report, you can check it out right here. And if you're not subscribed, we'd appreciate it if you did that. Thank you. Remember, superior judgment trumps superior skill. Take care.